Cathilea Robinett is here today. I know a lot of you know her, and if you don't know her, you probably know of her. Cathilea is the Executive Director of the Center for Digital Government and the Center for Digital Education. She does national research and advisory institutes focused on information technology policy and best practices in state and local government and education. She's also the Executive Vice President of eRepublic, which is the center's parent company, where she regularly consults on editorial directions of its magazines, government technology, public CIO, emergency management, and Texas technology. I don't know what Texas technology is, but we'll take it. And the major themes of its annual conferences held across the county. So their organization is very involved, for example, in helping Virginia manage COVIDs. Cathilea is a frequent speaker for worldwide government and education organizations, including Harvard University, the United Nations, the State Legislative Leaders Foundation, the National Conference of State Legislatures, the Council of State Governments, the World Congress on Information Technology, and many more. She's quoted frequently in the press in articles that have appeared in USA Today, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, Forbes magazine, and many others. She is also the 2007 recipient of the National Association of State Chief Information Officers Champion Award in recognition of her outstanding contributions to advance public sector information technology initiatives. For 20 years, she has served as a thought leader and advisor to public and private sector professionals and has worked extensively with both sectors in helping them develop sound and successful strategies in the state and local and education markets. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask that we give a warm Virginia welcome to Cathilea Robinett. Cathilea.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. How are you? Good. Just good? Well, it's great to be here. I was really challenged to bring best practices to one of the best Commonwealth states in the nation when it comes to technology. So what I want to do today is walk you through some of those things that I'm seeing around the country that others are doing, and to kind of paint a picture of the trends in the landscape of what I'm seeing as I travel around. Last year was a crazy year for me in terms of travel, and this year I'm already off to a crazy start. Unfortunately, every week I've been on the East Coast where it's really cold. And I want you all to know that it was 80 degrees in Sacramento, my hometown, on Sunday. And I left that to come to Dallas and now here. So this morning I want to present something what we're calling life after. We believe that some fundamental shifts are happening in our industry, and we've been looking at that, and I want to share that with you. But first of all, I really want to congratulate you on your A- in the Digital State Survey. You all should actually give yourself a big hand for that, because that's quite an accomplishment. The Digital State Survey actually came about in 1997, and in those days, I used to run our event division. And I would go and meet with executives, and because my card said government technology in those days, they would look at me with glazed eyes about technology. Because in 1997, it definitely was not something that governors, policy advisors, agency secretaries were paying attention to. So we created the Digital State Survey to give you all your cover and the respect that technology should get in this market, and that has definitely accomplished that. When Governor Warner first got here many, many years ago, I knew that that was about to change. At that point, you had been below 25 in the Digital State Survey, and it had been really a push to change that and bring Virginia way up to the top. So to have that A- last year, I just want you to know that your neighbor to the north, Maryland, got a B, and they're not happy about it. So I actually had a meeting with them about 4 weeks ago with the governor's team there to figure out how they can change that grade and come up in the ranks. So just want you to know that Maryland's coming after you. So without further ado, want to go into life after here, talk about. First, I want to go to my favorite oracle, Yogi Berra, who says the future ain't what it used to be. And I'm going to warn you that the first part of this presentation, you're going to think I'm Debbie Downer, but I am going to come out of this in a very positive note. Because we're in interesting times. For the first time, we have college graduates that do not have the same opportunities that our generation had coming out of the workforce. And there are many things that are affecting that, and really the future ain't quite what it used to be, but it is changing, and we need to adapt to those changes that are going on in the market. Let's see, where am I supposed to point exactly? Here we go. Now, this is something I want to show you. This is a map that we've put together that is unemployment. You're going to see it starts, we're going to end up in last year, March of 2010. I actually haven't even taken it all the way forward. And you can see when she clicks on here, these changes. What you're looking for, the bad is the purple and the black. And you are going to see unemployment change in this country. So you can see what's happening here. It continues on. The plague. One thing that wasn't mentioned in my bio is we actually acquired Governing Magazine, which is the public policy magazine for elected officials. We did that in December of 2009. So we're also over that. And one thing that we're working on the governing side is to display information in this way. So you can see what this looks like. Unless you're in North Dakota, which actually North Dakota has money. They have a lot of money. You can see that the country is in an interesting place today. Now, some more on budgets, just to talk about what is happening out there beyond the scope of Virginia. You can see here, this is from the National Association of State Budget Officers. I actually was just with those folks last week, and normally you can see the percentage of growth year over year. What is going to happen now when the budgets come back, as you can see here, the percentage is going to be lower overall. So, what's happening across there? Major cuts to higher ed, major cuts to K-12, and a lot of consolidation, which you all have done here already, but a lot of states are following there. And again, I think when it comes back, when those budgets come back, there is going to be a new normal. And the interesting thing about these times is that people are really being more innovative than ever. And one other thing that's really happening, Barry being here from the county, local governments are impacted, I think, in a much heavier way. I've just been with a bunch of local government folks recently, and they are very much impacted by these budget pressures. And again, trying to look at really creative and collaborative ways for combating that. In the long run, though, you can see what's going to happen here. It is going to rebound, and there is going to be a huge, this healthcare debate that's going on and what that's going to mean for our budgets. As you know, if you listen to the State of the Union address, there is going to be reduced federal funding, and the economic stimulus funding pretty much is going to end after this year. And then finally, one thing, though, that I think is interesting that's going on is a procurement change that I think is very necessary. We're seeing a lot more interesting performance-based procurement, different public-private partnerships that I haven't seen before, and I think that's really going to be a big move. Now, you want to look at who is going to emerge first here. You can see that we've broken it down into Tier 1 and Tier 2 states. Those states that have natural resources are going to recover quicker. In fact, North Dakota, I just want to say, what's so interesting about North Dakota right now is they have such a coal boom going on that they have a town there that we're covering right now because it's like the Wild West. It's like the gold rush. It's like 1850 in California. There's so much going on there. They don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the workers. They don't have the people that can work in the restaurants and all the other service organizations to care for that city. And it's just popped up out of nowhere. And it's really interesting. We're going to be covering that in governing. So you can see where those budgets are going to return in those states that aren't in as dire straits as others. So what's happening today some things are very interesting. This is a briefing that was done by the National Governors Association. Look at some of these themes. Now, these are governors. You optimize the technology, consolidate the data centers, shared services, aggregating multi-agency purchasing. This has been unheard of before, where at the gubernatorial level you're having this kind of discussion. In fact, for me, it's so interesting today. I've been doing this for almost 20 years, and I've never felt as fashionable as I feel about technology today. Because now all of a sudden, you know, we have 29 new governors. You had 2 governors that actually went on to United States Senate positions. So we have 29 new governors out there. And it's so interesting to see all of them look at technology as a strategic view. Well, not all of them. Some of them are still a little old school. But a lot of them are really looking at that. So you can see from this briefing here, these are some of the trends that are going on. I also love this quote that comes from Texas. And again, you can see when budgets are tight, people are looking to technology as really the only way out of this. And that is a huge change that I've seen over the years. So, what's happened over time is a lot of stovepipes, a lot of duplication, a lot of turf, and today, what's happening across the nation is no more stovepipes, no more duplication, no more turf, and there's no more kidding. Before, you'd kind of go along with this, but that's very much going on in states and local governments, no matter what, which I think is driving really interesting times. So I'm going to key up on some of these points today. This is our Life After Thought Leadership paper. We do one every year, so this was the one we did last year. We have a new one coming out. It should be out any minute. And you'll see it goes into simple and engaging, social and responsible, seamlessly connected, shared, streamlined, sustainable, secure, smart, and skilled. Now I'm going to hit on some of those points today. But let's talk about the digital majority. I spend actually a fair amount of my time talking to elected officials. Now, Sam, I know that you were one, and you are great, but most of your colleagues don't get it, and that's how I spend most of my life, getting them to understand that this world that we live in and they're governing in today is quite different. So this just shows you a few things here. As you know, the world has changed, right? How many of you have kids born between 1985 and 2000? Most of us do. So do I. So those are millennials, and as you know, they're very different, right? They're multitasking. They've grown up with technology. They don't think anything of it. Those kids are now in the workforce, and they're voting. So that's one thing that's definitely changing. And they are the group that you're building government for. The other thing I want to point out here is you see that 38%. So those are adults 65 plus. That is the largest growing number of folks going online. In fact, I will tell you that my husband is an only child, and his 88-year-old mother has discovered Gmail. He is now Gmail help desk. Luckily, we live 5 minutes away, and he can help her with her Gmail problems. But the great thing about that is her best friend lives in Bath, England, and she can now communicate with her regularly, and she's communicating with friends. And another fun story, I just love this. I was speaking in Indianapolis, and that's where she was born. And she hasn't been back there in 50 years. And she had 2 homes that she grew up in. And I visited both homes, took a photo on my BlackBerry, sent it to her in her Gmail account, and she was able to see the 2 homes that she grew up in. So the beauty of having that group online, and it's very, very important that you look at your strategies for both sides of that spectrum as well. And again, you can just look at wirelessly. Here's some other demographics of what's going on. And let's talk about the first thing that's really impacting life after. And this is California. They won Best of the Web. You all have won Best of the Web before. California took it last year. And I will tell you a good story about California. Terry Takai was the Chief Information Officer of Michigan. She left there to come to California. Now, I'm a native Californian, a fourth generation Californian, which that's very, very rare in our state. And I was really appalled by our web presence in California. When Terry got there, she made this the #1 priority. And I highly recommend that you go check out this site. It's probably the most beautiful site out there. And this was under our former governor. You know, we had the governator, and now we have Governor Moonbeam. I don't know what it is about California. We just have those names. And our former governor, he really embraced this medium, right? You know, he's a movie star. He's used to being videotaped and having all the attention. So he really embraced social media, and he embraced Twitter. In fact, he has 1.3 million followers on Twitter while he was governor, which was more than Britney Spears. Just want you to know. So, great site in California, a lot of good things going on there. And we just want to point out utah.gov, another great site, won the former year. They've done some pretty interesting things here. One thing I want to point out is this idea of location-based information. This is what's taking the nation by storm. So you have, wherever you are geographically located, you can just serve up information based on your geography. They were the first ones to do this. Now Michigan also has location-based information. California, a few others are piloting this as well, but this is very much where the information is going. Also, a few other things. The web is back. It's very interesting what's happening today. E-government was really hot about 2000. Then it died a little bit, and I will tell you now, there's so much low-hanging fruit on the web. And one of my favorite stories actually comes from right here. Now, Lynn, you've probably heard this, but the rest of you might not have heard this. Many years ago, you all were the first ones to develop Live Help. And here I was in California at my desk, judging Best of the Web. Now, in 1996, me and another guy who was a colleague of mine, we came up with this idea of Best of the Web. Let's look at websites. And in fact, in 1996, I think it was Department of Motor Vehicles actually won Best of the Web, because in those days, we didn't have portals. We just had agency sites. Well, you all came up with Live Help. And there I was in Sacramento, and I judging Best of the Web, and I click on the Live Help button, and up pops the little text window. It says, "Hello, I'm Christopher, the webmaster. How can I help you?" I said, "Hello, I'm Cathilea Robinett, and I'm judging Best of the Web. Can you show me your privacy policy?" And on my screen in Sacramento, up flips the privacy policy for Virginia, and I'm thinking, wow, this is so cool. Then the text box comes back up, and he says, "Okay, I showed you. Do we win?" So you didn't win that year, but you won several years later. But it was a great, great story, and I love to see Live Help. You really set the stage for everybody else, because you'll go and see the Live Help that's out there. It's pretty exciting. Now, a few other things I want to point out. Elected officials are really engaging in the technology. This is Nathan Valentine. He's from South Carolina. And I actually moderated a session a few months ago with two legislators, one who was a Democrat who represents the Upper East Side in New York City, and Nathan. And this guy, his site, he just uses technology like you wouldn't believe. And what I love about this story is he's a rural legislator who has a blog, he uses video very effectively, and he tweets, and he has all kinds of followers. It's amazing. He has 30,000 people in his jurisdiction that he represents, and he's got 6,000 people who follow him regularly, which is pretty good. One thing about this, I'll tell you, an interesting thing that's changed is that, again, as I said, technology is fashionable, and I can tell by what goes on. Now, last year, I was asked by the State Legislative Leaders Foundation to come speak for them in October in Boston. Now, those are the speakers of the House, the presidents of the Senate, your majority leader and minority leader of both the House and the Senate. So, this was an event. It was 2 days. There were 43 leaders from 30 states there. Now, they're doing a series of events, and the first one was actually for elected officials on how they could use technology. So it was kind of an all-star speaking cast that main day. The folks that ran Obama's campaign, all the online stuff, the folks who had also worked with Bush, just great people. So I was part of that opening day, but the next day, what was so telling to me is I ran a breakout session on how to have an award-winning website as an elected official. I want you to know that 43 leaders came to my breakout and took notes like college students. That is a big shift. I have actually been a speaker for that group 10 years ago, and I will tell you that none of them would have done that before. So again, another way that technology is kind of changing, and if you can get elected officials where they live, which is about getting reelected, then maybe you can bring them along for the rest of the ride. So, blogging. This is my favorite blog. This is Washington's Secretary of State. Also, the Washington Department of Transportation. They do a great job of using this blog effectively to reach out to their constituents. They do it in a really creative, eye-catching, fun way. So blogging is definitely making its way here. And next, I really want to talk about performance and that smart part of life after, because this, I think, is the key to our future. The great thing about being in Maryland a few weeks ago is I had the really good honor of sitting in on a state stat meeting. Now, as you know, Governor O'Malley, when he was mayor, he created City Stat in Baltimore, which still exists, and he was very granular about his management of that. He would go into City Stat meetings and really talk about, why are these 4 dots still there from last week? Why hasn't the trash collection been changed? So he's taken all of that to State Stat. I actually got to witness a State Stat meeting. The day that I observed happened to be the transportation and highway folks. So you had the Secretary of Transportation and Highway, the Deputy Secretary, and they monitor all various statistics based on performance, based on the overall governor's goals and their agency and department's goals, and they measure everything there. And to see them and to watch this in action was probably one of the more game-changing things I've seen. Now, I've seen this in other ways when I go elsewhere. Indiana also does this. They do a very good job of it. Washington, D.C., when Fenty got there, he's out now, but when he was there, he was using this. Chicago uses this. But to see Maryland with a process that is very regimented and very disciplined on how they do that, and there's a young woman who runs State Stat, and it's just amazing. I think if we all governed in this fashion, the United States would be completely different. So I was really impressed by that. New York City is doing this in a big way as well. Mayor Bloomberg there, and they would be the 4th largest state, they will always tell you, just so you know. New York City, he's very much a technology mayor, and he also has the former mayor of Indianapolis, who is now on his team as a deputy mayor for operations there, and they are really looking at this. In fact, one thing that's really exciting there is they are launching what they're calling an analytics center. It's probably the first analytics center that I've seen where everything is going to be measured, very sophisticated. So I'm very excited, as you can tell by this area, and highly recommend that you look at this. You might be doing some of this, but this is very much where the world is going. Now, just want to point out one other thing that I think is very interesting. How many of you saw Minority Report in 2002? Any of you? Good. So interesting. I actually just watched it again. So in 2002, think about when we saw that. That seems so high tech. All the different parts of that movie, different things that were part of that. Today, what's interesting is we are going in that direction. Now, this is even old. It's interesting to me because this was December of 2009. In September of 2009, at the Best of the Web conference that we hosted in Hollywood, was the first time I heard this word called augmented reality. What I love about doing Best of the Web is sometimes I'm with these geeky web developers who I love because they're really usually fairly cutting edge. And some of these folks were telling me that augmented reality was where it's going to be. And of course, that is using a 3D experience for everything you do, also based on geography and location. Well, this issue of Esquire, if you have a webcam, you could actually have a 3D experience on your own computer that goes between the magazine and the web that creates this 3D experience. What's interesting is the federal government has really replicated that already on Recovery.gov. Now you see, here's this guy, he's got a smartphone. Do you see he's pointing it at that building? Now look what happens. All the information, these bubbles, show all the era money that was actually spent that went to that building and what it was spent on. So this concept of location-based information, using your smartphones in a really integrated, smart experience is very much where things are going. And I think it's very exciting. Again, you can see a different representation of mapping and how they're showcasing information. But part of smart government today is going to be able to deliver these types of services in this fashion. Now, another word that you might have heard already, but you're going to hear more, is something called crowdsourcing. That is using your constituents to give you instant feedback. This is a site from a small town in Texas. Because it's Texas, it looks like Manor, but it's not, it's Manor. So, Texas uses this Manor Lab site, which was actually set up by a young chief information officer. He was 25. He is now long gone, and he's gone to work for one of the companies that helped him set this all up. But he's still consulting the city, and he actually consults with us. He's a great guy. But everything they do here is crowdsourced, which means if the mayor wants to do something or the city council wants to do something, they actually send it out and talk to their constituents. Should they do this? Is this a good idea? What do you think about that? And what they've done is they've given points to get citizen engagement really high. So the more active you are, the more points you get. And it's kind of cute because they give fun little things away. Like if you get the most points for that month, you get to ride with the police chief in the police car. Maybe they let you turn on the siren. Or you get lunch with the mayor or some fun things like that. But what's happening is the citizens in Manor are really actively engaged. And this is something that I'm seeing across the nation, how to utilize the constituents that you have, whether it's business or your citizens, to get feedback on what you're doing. It's a great advance for citizen engagement. Another thing that's going on is this idea of the citizen coder. It started in Washington, D.C. when Vivek Kundra, who's now our federal CIO, came up with this idea of doing apps for democracy. Now that's come full scale. There's so many other jurisdictions that have taken publicly available information, put it out there to have different people use the information in interesting ways. Now what's interesting about this is I have a good example of what can happen with a citizen coder. Now, this was an actual site in California. Does this look exciting and enticing? Wouldn't you want to use this? No. All right, meet my friend. Here he is. So this guy and a few friends, a couple 6-packs of beer on a Monday night, with some Yahoo tools, created I Am Caltrain. So they took this boring interface and created a new site that's very user-friendly, effective, and they just did it. Now what's interesting is California was smart enough to adopt it, and now they're using this, but this is happening all over the country. California, for example, just launched their program with a competition with their apps. The good thing about what California did is they institutionalized how this was done, because you can imagine how challenging it is if somebody's building an app for you, whether they're a college student, a business person, whomever. How are you going to keep that app, and how are you going to make sure that when your data gets updated, that the app is also updated? And California has done a really good job of confronting those details. But again, this goes to show that you have very talented people, particularly here in Virginia, and you could put them to work for you in a number of ways, and this is going on across the country. This just gives you an idea of how many data sets and feeds are available in various states. And then one other thing that's going on is this concept of transparency, which I know you're all aware of, but it is going to continue to be a major push. What most people don't know is transparency actually started by a tax rights group. So This was legislation that passed many years ago in many states, and I was on a panel with several legislators, 4 or 5 years ago, regarding this, and some states have more aggressive legislation than others. But they really pushed to make sure that taxpayers could find out how their money was being spent. Now, that has been a big push from the federal government as well, and it's really interesting because it's become a Democratic issue as well as a Republican issue. This is a fundamental shift that is going to be with us forever from here on out. The next challenge for everyone in transparency, because I've had to look at a lot of these transparency sites, and they're not really good or effective. The next challenge is going to take your information and make sure it's truly transparent, that actually people can read it and use it, and it's beneficial. Fundamental shift here, not going to go away. It's going to continue to be a big push wherever you are. So, speaking of that, the Sunlight Foundation is really that organization that's shining the light on transparency. And they were actually the group that worked on apps for democracy way back when. Now, I told you I spoke to the State Legislative Leaders Foundation in October, and I want to show you how I got their attention. And I did get their attention. So here is their site. What I did is I put in their URL into a site called Polygraphed. Now what it did is it pops up. Do you see over here? So you've got their board of directors, and I picked on someone. So this is one guy here. Now look, within seconds, I found every single donation that was made to him by every person, every company, everybody. And I showed that to them live. So the Sunlight Foundation every month is launching a new site just like this. So it's something I always want to make everyone aware of so that governments can kind of stay ahead or at least in tune with what's happening and what's available. So Polygraphed, a wild site. You can imagine I turned some heads of some speakers and presidents of the Senate out there who had no idea that this was even available. A few other things are going on. I just want to bring up some examples. Again, it's hard for you all here because you're such the leaders around the country, but there is a fair amount of migrating to single systems going on out there. These are two examples from Washington where many areas have all come together and consolidated to build a single system. It has great return on investment, great stories. Both of these have gone extremely well. They're brand new, but reports back, they've saved a lot of money. Really great examples from the state of Washington. And then other things in the consolidation realm, since normally I talk a lot about consolidation since that's so hot out there, but you all are really the leaders there. There are some other things going on regarding agency consolidation, boards, many things going on where people are really looking at what are we doing in government and should we really be doing that anymore? And that's happening across the board, particularly with the new Republican governors coming in. They're very much looking at this as well. So just because we've been doing this for the last 100 years, should we continue to do that? And that's being looked at all over the place. One point I want to make here comes out of Michigan, and I think this is an interesting story. They merged actually their Department of Information Technology with Management and Budget to create a new Department of Technology, Management and Budget. It was interesting to me because some people were very excited about this. I actually thought the opposite. I thought, we're putting technology back in management and budget where it used to be a long time ago. Interesting thing happened prior. The Chief Information Officer got the lead spot to manage this agency. Today, that's not the case. They actually hired the budget officer from Utah, who luckily I adore. He has come and taken this top spot here. So now we have a budget officer. He actually just appointed a new chief information officer. So we're keeping careful tabs on how this is going. Another thing that I'm seeing right now is a little bit of a swing backwards when it comes to technology placement and governance models. Nevada, for example, that governor ran on a small government ticket. So he has taken technology, put it back into finance and administration. In Arizona, Alan, my colleague, just came from there. They are looking at disbanding their information technology agency, putting that back in Department of Administrative Services. So there is some of that thing going on out there. We're trying to make sure that hopefully that pendulum swings back, because we think technology needs a seat at the table, needs to be more strategic. But that's a little bit what's happening in the consolidation realm. Now, shared services is something that I'm really passionate about. We've been talking about shared services for years, but finally we're seeing some major liftoff here. I love this example. It comes from Ohio, and I think they've done a really good job of having an entire system of really evaluating what is going on in those agencies there, and should they really be doing it, how should they pull that together and create a real shared services model that's embraced by all the agencies and departments. They have a great process. I've met with this team before, very impressed with what they're doing there. Also, Governor Snyder from Michigan, new governor, he came from Gateway, so he was the CEO of Gateway Computer. He is probably going to be one of the prominent technology governors we have. Day 2 on the job, he made a huge announcement that the state is going to be offering shared services in a variety of ways to counties, cities, K-12, and higher ed. So look for more there. And I'm also starting to see, for example, in Missouri, the counties there are so poor and really do not have the technology they need. And what's interesting is that the state, they're providing shared services back to those counties, particularly in the web space and a few other infrastructure hosting areas, so they're able to provide their counties with more service. That is something that we're seeing as well, and I'm pretty excited about that. Now, this concept of cloud. Have you noticed that every vendor has a cloud offering? It's interesting when you are out there and you're talking to different people about cloud. There's so much, it's a little bit like the Wild West still on cloud, private cloud or community cloud or a true public cloud. But very much, this is the first time I think in my career, people have always talked about technology being a utility. And in certain places, I am starting to see that viewpoint start to happen, where if you outsource some of the things that you're doing, you go to a cloud model, it is more like a utility. And I think that's the first time I really start to glimpse that concept of technology being a utility. We're just seeing a huge amount of movement here, a lot of hype. But I'm really excited to say that Public CIO this year, we're doing a special report that's going to look at cloud and shared services and really look at the drill down and the heavy lifting and the procurement models. How are people really doing some of this stuff? How are they handling security? All those questions that you have, we're going to try to tackle this year from a federal, state, and local perspective. Now, one thing I think is really important is procurement is going to be key to everything as we drive forward. Pennsylvania, who was the other state that got an A- along with you all, they've done a really good job with technology. They have taken procurement and really consolidated that. And you can see they have specialists. They've really achieved a huge amount of savings, great ROI there with their procurement changes. And I think it's really important that procurement stay in step with this modern world that we live in today. And that's something that we preach wherever we go. You have new models. You've got performance-based procurement, you've got new public-private partnerships, you've got self-funded options, and the procurement needs to really stay in step with that. In fact, I was in Oregon recently, a few weeks ago, with them on this very issue because they don't have their procurement quite in step with what they need to do with some of the budget issues there in Oregon. So legislatures are looking at that all over the country. Now, you all are real leaders when it comes to the broadband plan. In fact, Karen Jackson, she's always my opinion leader. When I need to know all the stuff about this, I usually call her because she knows more about it than anybody I know. But this is very, very important as this strategy rolls out across the country from an economic development standpoint. Every governor is an education governor, and every governor or every mayor or any elected official is all about economic development and the strength of bringing jobs to their states or localities. So I think both of these initiatives are really important. I also think that this area is a game changer. So again, you all have those kids that are millennials. How do you communicate with your kids? Do you text? Another one of my favorite stories comes from taking a team. I had a basketball team several years ago, And my son was on that team, and I ended up taking that team to a national championship. So I coached boys basketball for a long time. It was actually my most fun thing that I ever did, more so than all this stuff. It was great. But the funny story about that is I had 10 13-year-old boys with me. We were all sitting in the same room, and they were texting each other. Right? It is the generation that we live in today. Smartphones, mobile apps, very interesting. I was just actually with Samsung. Samsung is coming into the United States in a big way, and I was with their whole leadership team recently and looking at some of the new products that they have, and this is really changing government. This also is your answer to the digital divide. When I was in Wisconsin, I was asked this question about the digital divide. It's interesting to note, if you look at that penetration rate for phones, and you look at when phones, the smartphones, become less expensive as well, and it doesn't matter who you are or what level of income you make. Do you notice that people have cell phones? In fact, an interesting note, you know that 4 out of 10 Americans no longer have home phones. People are just going to their cell phone, right? I don't really answer my home phone anymore because it's usually a telemarketer. So this is all changing. And for you, you really have to think about not only using technology from a mobility standpoint to your workers who are in the field, but also your citizens and businesses who are really demanding that you have mobile applications out there. Here's a variety of different things to look at those mobile apps that are going on. I will say that Arkansas has probably done the best job here. So as a state, they've really worked on their mobile apps, been kind of forefront, first to come out with some really interesting, truly secure, very much online mobile applications. So look to them as the leaders. And you know, some of these applications have just been really important. The FBI Most Wanted is hugely downloaded. In fact, it's funny, my husband is a musician and a college professor, and he and my son sometimes don't exactly understand what it is I do, and I understand that. And one day, my husband was talking about something, and I said, talking about this FBI Most Wanted app, and he says, hey, I have that on my iPhone. I'm like, well, great, that is what I do. We do work on some of these things. So this is going to get more and more popular as we roll. Make sure that you're looking to that. This is a local site that I really love, talking about smartphones, because this is a citizen engagement site out of Pittsburgh. What's so great about this is it's very simple. When you go to this homepage, it's like point and click. So what you do is with your smartphone, let's say you go to visit your mom, and she has some graffiti on a fence across from her house, and you don't want that there. It's not good for that neighborhood. So you take a photo of that, and it uploads to the iBerg site, and it notices your geographical location. So it knows exactly where that fence is, notes that, showcases, date stamps that, and also sends you an alert when that graffiti is going to be painted over, and also sends you another alert when the graffiti was corrected. So really easy, fast, and you want to talk about a citizen experience where these folks really will love and admire their local government leaders and elected officials. It's very much one of those great citizen engagement tools, and I love this site because it's so user-friendly. Now, sustainability is a really important part for government as they roll out. A few things are going on today in the sustainability area. And I'm not talking about just green sustainability, I'm talking about making government really sustainable. I love this example here from Hennepin County. They have this results-only work environment. And this has really kind of challenged what I call our old school views on life versus looking at results-oriented work. So they have changed their entire environment here. So people no longer have to kind of clock in and clock out. They're held accountable for their actions, and there are some other jurisdictions that are adopting this. And one thing that I really want to stress, I know you all have been leaders in the telework area compared to other places that I've been, but it's really important to challenge some of our former ideas. And I actually had to be challenged myself. There was a young guy who worked for me, and I did not want him to telework. I wanted to see them. I have an office back in Sacramento. We have 50 analysts that comb the country looking for all this great stuff all the time. And he challenged me to that. And you know, he was right. So I think all of us need to be challenged a little bit on this telework principle. First of all, it is where things are going. Secondly, every study I've seen that people are more productive when they have some flexibility in their schedule. How many of you have better home offices than you have in your office? Right? So people are used to that, and you have millennials coming into the workforce, which are very different. So I just remind you that that is part of where life after is going and part of what government should be thinking about. And this is a great example. One other thing here just has to do with security. And today, life after is about being secure as well. Now, you all have joined together with other states to create, I think, what we're calling real best practice here. And again, this goes to telework, and it goes to making sure that things are secure so that your workers can stay at home and access the information they need. But security is really important because none of us want to end up in the headlines anywhere. And I will tell you that Sam mentioned that I spoke at the United Nations, which I did. It was the freakiest thing I've ever done because I was at a security conference and I moderated a panel. Well, at lunch, I was with all these former hackers. Now, it was pretty scary. This guy went up to a woman, and just by talking to her enough with right questions, actually could figure out her passwords. Because what are your passwords? Your kid's birthday, your anniversary, your birthday, or you have your password that's still up on your computer. So, security is very, very important for life after. Great things going on there, but just make sure that you secure everything as you go forward, which I'm sure you're doing. So you can download Life After. It's a great thought leadership book that we have. It has a lot of great examples from around the country. So you can download that here, or give me your card. I can make sure and send you a hard copy. And I just want to end by talking about, I think, what's so important out there and anywhere in government is to challenge our own assumptions sometimes. We're really in interesting times. I am more excited today than I've ever been. But we're really in a little bit of a sea change. We have so many things happening, with budgets being very constrained, that's bringing about collaboration, consolidation, things I thought I would never see before, I'm starting to see, where people are working together, coming up with new and innovative ideas. You've also got technology in a place where it's never been before. It's innovative. New things are happening. So when you have those budget constraints, new technologies, and you have leaders who are finally starting to get it, that the only way out of any of this is technology. You have all those dynamics going on, and this is really a time to embrace that. So to challenge our own assumptions, I have to do the same thing to myself. Challenge your own assumptions. You might have to change your behavior a little bit. You might have to think differently about your management style. You've got baby boomers coming out of the workforce. You've got millennials coming into the workforce. And with all that, if you embrace that and ride that wave, we can really change the culture. And you can really build that government that we're building towards, because we're really building it for the next generation. And I think these are really exciting times. And no matter what I do, I try to have fun. So I want to share this last video with you, because as you're changing behavior, you should always have a little fun. So I highly recommend that you check out that site. They have all kinds of ways that they've made changing behavior really fun. And again, I really applaud you. It's great being here. I don't think I've ever actually addressed a Virginia audience in an intimate setting here, so it's great. I want to see you guys come back on Best of the Web. You've won that before, so I have great hopes for what's going to happen there. And again, I applaud you for the A-. We've got this year, we're refining the instrument, and the next year, hopefully we'll see an A. Any way I can help, this has always been a place that's been very fond for me. It's great to be here, so thank you very much.
We have a few minutes, so we want to open the floor for questions, and I have one, but I'm not going to start. But does anyone have a question for Cathilea? I think she likes really hard questions.
Oh, yeah. Question?
So this is not a hard question.
Okay, good. Give me a soft one to warm me up.
I really did enjoy your presentation.
Thank you.
But I'm also curious as to what are you seeing in terms of social media and how government is using that effectively?
Well, I'm seeing a lot in that area. And actually, if you look at the California site, you will see that I think California probably does a fantastic job, along with Utah is doing a really good job of that as well. So several things that we're seeing. Again, I try to give you a good example of blogging and Twitter. I know our speaker pro tem in California, she uses Twitter like you wouldn't believe, really in communicating with her constituents and getting the word out. So you're seeing some elected officials using Twitter. You're seeing Facebook. I know Utah, it's funny because I have all these people who friend me on Facebook, and then I get to find out who's doing what. I have mixed opinions about Facebook personally. I go on Facebook to see old high school friends, and I make wedding cakes as a weird hobby, and people like that because I can show the last wedding cake I did. I don't really want to interact with my government on Facebook personally, but that's just my own personal opinion about some of these sites. Social engagement, it's just one of those areas, it's a little bit of the Wild West. I go to some places, they don't use it at all. And I always want to compare things because I really like the comparison. If you look at years ago, just because I've been doing this for so long, it's funny when the internet came out. So in 1995, if you recall, there was a big, no way can government employees have access to the internet because they're just going to waste their time and go online or some crazy thing, right? Well, that didn't happen. Then email came out. And then it was interesting because, we don't really want to give access to email because whatever. Well, that didn't happen either. So now you look at social media, and many people have different policies. They block different things. They're not engaged with it as much. And nationally, there are some guidelines that are being established, particularly attorneys general have done a good job of really looking at the policies in place. So I think you kind of have to open it up and embrace it. It's one of those things that we live in a world of social networking, and it's going to continue. And who knows where it's going to go. I mean, I don't know who's going to invent the next thing. I do know that mobility and mobile apps are just going to explode, and that's going to be a citizen engagement issue too. So I have seen a lot of states really engage with it, and I've seen other states not and have policies. And I think it's one of those things you got to ride the wave or you get swept under the wave. And I can point you to some specifics on that just because I spend a lot of time looking at these sites. Barry.
Kathleen, in terms of citizen services, we've heard for many years that we couldn't depend on the internet for citizen services, have versus have nots. Then we got penetration with the majority of the people in the nation use the internet. We're seeing the same thing in mobile applications.
Yeah.
Not everybody's got a smartphone. So if you deploy applications like that for citizens, you're advantaging one group over another. How do you see that changing? And second part of the question is, where do you think we'll be in 2020 with technology?
Oh my gosh. Am I going to be sitting here talking in 2020 about the same thing? Probably. Well, the first question, I just think it's interesting. As I look at other countries, every 2 years I'm part of something called the World Congress on Information Technology, and we do the Global IT Excellence Awards. And it gives me an opportunity to go look at what other countries are doing. And in 2004, what I saw what was going on in Finland Finland with smartphones. First of all, everyone has a smartphone in Finland. Doesn't matter who they are. And in Finland, if you want a Diet Coke or a Sprite, you take your smartphone and you point it at the vending machine. It takes money out of your bank account, and your Sprite comes down, and there you go. Here in this country, we're piloting toll roads with our smartphones. So I think in other countries, they're so advanced here. I think that's coming, and I do think that the smartphones, the prices are going to come down, and I think that is going to level the playing field from a haves and have-nots. I do think it is our answer, or eventually, to that digital divide. That's why I really promote that government's really thinking about their mobile apps. Right now, libraries are also much more engaged than ever, and whatever your citizen kiosks, there's also still a fair amount of kiosks being launched out there in buildings, in malls. I've seen a lot of different things there. So I think when we make this transition, you still have to do some other technologies that are going to get to everyone, but then I ultimately think that phones are going to be the answer. That's my prediction. Did I answer? Did you ask me a second part that I didn't get?
What's it going to look like in 2020?
Well, if you look at the change that's happened in the last 10 years, wow. We've seen, if you saw the movie The Social Network, you've seen some major changes in that area. But for the most part, if you look at the last 10 years, you've seen consolidation, you've seen e-government being adopted. We haven't seen that huge of a change. I think mobility is going to be a huge player, and I do think that when some of these markets open up, I think from an economic development standpoint, some new companies are going to come into the market and start developing apps that I can't even predict, but that's going to be the game changer. I also think the technology world is going to shift. I think some of the kind of the old style approach of how we've been doing things, particularly in government, is going to start switching. And I think you've got some other companies that have different models that are younger with different ideas are coming into this marketplace. I had a good example of California where there was a competition with some young entrepreneurs to develop some specific applications that really had kind of been old guard. It had been done like this for a very long time. And these young companies that actually challenged this process and come in way cheaper and got the job done pretty quickly. There's a great example of New York City Department of Ed. You can imagine how many kids they service there. There was a major contract that they had with someone that to build an application, and it had been 18 months later, they still didn't have their application. One company, a young, interesting, innovative company, came in and built that app in a week. And that changed the game in New York City. So I think it's going to get pretty interesting.
Maybe one more question, and then we need to take a break.
Good morning. I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
And we talked a lot and saw some great examples of mobile applications to serve our customers.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm thinking about mobile applications to make us more productive.
Mm-hmm.
Mobile phones, iPhones, iPads, great for traveling. But there are some barriers within state government to make that happen. And you have good examples of government agencies who have used mobile applications and devices to improve productivity.
Mm-hmm. Some examples of that? The iPad, it's interesting, iPad, whatever, now you've got the Galaxy coming out. I think those are going to be some game changers. I'm just starting to see that. Alan, have you seen any productivity examples?
Inspections in New York City from the Department of Health on mobile dispatch.
Yeah, restaurant inspections. When you get into field, building inspectors, even you're getting into social workers out in the field, that productivity completely changed the game. Also, in some places today, when you're pulled over, let's say by state police, you can pay your parking ticket right there. They just swipe everything. It's all automated. So some of those things are coming.